United States.
Homeland Security. Forced removal. Kristi Noem will not be remembered fondly by Americans or her workforce.
2 days after President Donald Trump kicked her out of his cabinet, Kristi Noem was thanking him for her new assignment. She did concede, however, that the job is a made-up one. "I do want to thank the President for creating this and for giving me the honour and the opportunity to serve as a special envoy to this region," she told Latin American leaders on March 7th at the first meeting of the Shield of the Americas, a hitherto non-existent coalition of right-leaning countries in the Western Hemisphere. Instead of talking about drugs and migrants at home, now she will be doing it abroad. For weeks, her firing as Homeland Security Secretary had seemed imminent. Republican and Democratic senators called for her resignation after federal immigration agents killed 2 American protesters in Minneapolis earlier this year. She faced intense questioning in Congress. On March 5th, Mr. Trump ended the suspense, announcing her dismissal in a lengthy Truth Social post that focused largely on her successor, Markwayne Mullin, a senator from Oklahoma. Ms. Noem, a former governor of South Dakota, had no law enforcement experience before joining the department. Yet she oversaw its transformation into an entity focused first and foremost on immigration policing. Congress turbocharged this effort by directing nearly $170 billion to the department's immigration agencies. Ms. Noem made herself the face of the president's mass deportation campaign. She posed with a gun alongside Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE, agents on the southern border. She filmed a video in front of caged deportees at a notorious Salvadoran prison. Before any investigation could be made into the death of Rennie Good, one of the protesters who was killed in Minneapolis, Ms. Noem had labelled her actions domestic terrorism. Yet none of these things seems to have been the ultimate reason Ms. Noem lost her job. During hearings on Capitol Hill last week, she was asked to explain how contracts were awarded for a $220 million advertising campaign. One ad features Ms. Noem on a horse in front of Mount Rushmore, where she tells immigrants, "Break our laws, we'll punish you." Ms. Noem asserted that the president had signed off on the campaign. He denied this, and now she is out as Homeland Security Secretary. Ms. Noem leaves behind a violent and controversial legacy at the department. A rush to train thousands of new ICE recruits and a desire to use the Border Patrol to project force meant that many of the agents sent into cities were ill-prepared to deal with protests. The killings in Minneapolis soured Americans on the administration's immigration policies and forced it to retreat, at least temporarily, from its aggressive tactics in cities. Ms. Noem was unpopular even within her own department. Officials who left over the past year describe an environment of fear and intimidation, largely created by Corey Lewandowski, her right-hand man. The department is now in limbo. Democrats have refused to approve further funding unless it includes new restrictions on ICE, such as a ban on face masks. But their giddiness over Ms. Noem's exit may help grease budget negotiations. There is unlikely to be a big shift in policy. Mr. Mullin served for a decade in the House of Representatives before being elected to the Senate in 2022. He is also an immigration hawk and defended the tactics of ICE agents in Minneapolis following Good's death. More importantly, Stephen Miller, the Deputy Chief of Staff, remains the architect of the administration's border and deportation agenda. His job has never been in doubt.
United States.
Latino voters. Deport, lose support. Donald Trump's much-vaunted success with the Hispanics is turning to ashes.
I grew up watching The Apprentice, says Mario Guerrero. I voted for Trump every time he was on the ballot. But now, like many of his fellow Latinos, he regrets it. Mr. Guerrero, a construction boss in McAllen, Texas, warmed to Donald Trump because he's a businessman, he's a builder. You know, he's one of the most successful ones in the world. He's going to do something great for the economy. In 2024, there was an extra reason: chaos at the border, not far from where Mr. Guerrero lives. Under President Joe Biden, the influx of irregular migrants from Mexico turned into a flood. Mr. Guerrero saw thousands of people living in tents, having waded or paddled across the Rio Grande. It looked like a humanitarian crisis. During the election campaign, Mr. Trump promised to deport the worst of the worst, Mr. Guerrero recalls. When I heard that, I'm like, yes, dude, take out all the murderers, take out all the rapists. Now, he reflects, that's not what we're seeing. They are just taking everybody. Motorists must now stop and show their papers at checkpoints all over South Texas. Mass deportation has devastated the construction business. Workers are afraid to step out of their homes, says Renee Perez, a contractor, since anyone who looks Latino and has tools risks being snatched. With so few hands available, jobs take twice as long, he says. Mr. Guerrero complains of ICE agents grabbing workers halfway through pouring concrete. You're talking about a loss of like $20,000 off the bat, and you haven't even started the house, he says. What are we going to do if all these builders cannot finish projects and they start defaulting on loans? That's going to impact everybody. Latinos helped Mr. Trump win his second term. Polls show their support for him surged from 36% in 2020 to 48% in 2024, the highest share ever for a Republican presidential candidate. The biggest swings were in South Texas, where 12 of the 14 counties along the border went for Mr. Trump. Republicans boasted that Latinos had found a new home in their party. Now those gains are slipping away. A CNN poll found that in the year to February, Mr. Trump's approval rating among Latinos nationwide fell from 41% to 22%. Another poll from Pew in November shows that roughly a third of Latinos have considered leaving America in the past 6 months, primarily because of politics. Mr. Trump was lucky in 2024, Jim Henson, a pollster, argues. His support among Hispanics peaked just in time for the election. People were still reeling from inflation, and memories were still fresh of disorder on the border. Voters typically blamed Mr. Biden for both. Some of this was justified. Word had spread on the migrant grapevine that under Mr. Biden, anyone who walked across the border and claimed asylum would be allowed to stay in America while awaiting a hearing, which could take years. Mr. Biden tightened the rules dramatically in 2024, and the number of irregular arrivals plunged. However, the impression in voters' minds of a free-for-all did not fade in time for the presidential election. Our community was scared, recalls Joe Frank Martinez, the sheriff of Valverde County, a rural stretch of the border. At the peak of the influx, public services were overwhelmed. Householders quaked as strangers trekked across their property at night. People were asking, "When can I shoot someone knocking on the door? Can I shoot through the door?" Mr. Martinez told them, "No. You're going to shoot someone that might be asking for a glass of water." Though a lifelong Democrat, Mr. Martinez came out against Mr. Biden, because I believe in the rule of law. A year after Mr. Trump took over, many Latinos are less convinced that he represents the rule of law. Footage of federal agents killing protesters in Minnesota has appalled them. The mindset is they can do what they want and not be accountable to anyone, bristles Sheriff Martinez. In Texas, Mr. Guerrero was horrified to see immigration enforcers driving across people's front yards in pursuit of fugitives. What if they killed a child, he asks. Eddie Morales, a Democratic state representative, says his constituents can't stand the way Mr. Trump has pardoned campaign donors and the drug-running former president of Honduras. An Economist YouGov poll finds that 68% of Hispanics disapprove of Mr. Trump's handling of immigration. Most now favour abolishing ICE. Many are disappointed with the Trump economy too. Didn't he tell you that he was going to fix inflation on day one? Asks Mr. Morales. Hispanics now disapprove of Mr. Trump's handling of the economy and inflation by a margin of more than 2-1. Many voters think presidents have more control over prices than they really do. This helped Mr. Trump in 2024, but now hurts him, especially since his tariffs and war on Iran have helped push up prices. $100 barely buys half a basket at the grocery store, sighs Mr. Martinez. Latino disenchantment could decide the midterms. When redrawing districts to benefit themselves in Texas, Republicans assumed that Hispanic support would remain at 2024 levels. But it won't, claims a report by American Business Immigration Coalition Action, a trade group. Nationwide, a modest 10% swing puts at least 10 of the party's seats in the House of Representatives seriously at risk. In dozens more, Latinos could tip the outcome if races are close. The Economist YouGov poll found that 43% of Hispanics plan to vote for Democrats in the midterms, against 27% for Republicans. Recent elections are suggestive. Last autumn, record-breaking turnout propelled Democrats to winning the governorships of Virginia and New Jersey. That was mostly driven by Latinos who had sat out previous elections choosing to vote. In the March 3rd Senate primary in Texas, Latinos came out in droves for the Democrats. Republicans retain some advantages among Hispanics. A hardcore of MAGA fans think the Trump presidency is going brilliantly. Some hope he will push for democracy in Venezuela and Cuba. Republicans may have an edge on social issues too. Many Latinos think the Democratic Party is too focused on LGBTQ issues, says Mr. Morales. Republicans did well among Latinos in 2024 because we were talking about prosperity and hope, while the Democrat Party was talking about pronouns, says Monica de la Cruz, a Republican congresswoman from Texas. Nobody loves our Latino community more than I do, said Mr. Trump in 2024. Yet that feeling is ever less reciprocated. Mr. Guerrero will switch to supporting Democrats in November. Mr. Perez cannot vote, but his wife, who stayed at home in 2024, will now be backing the opposite of what's currently happening.
United States.
Healthcare. Treating an ailing market. Two very different states take aim at soaring hospital prices.
Vermont and Indiana do not agree on much. The former has no gestational limits on abortion. The latter has one of the harshest bans. Vermonters have been able to enjoy marijuana recreationally for nearly a decade. Hoosiers have no legal access to the drug. But last year, both embraced the same unprecedented healthcare policy. They will soon limit how much hospitals can charge patients with commercial insurance, the kind offered with a job. 2/3 of Americans are covered in this way. Typically, the price of care is negotiated between insurers and hospitals, but this has failed to keep costs down. Since 2000, prices at hospitals have soared by 250%, twice the overall rate for medical care and almost 3 times inflation. Hospitals now account for nearly a third of all American healthcare spending. Their high prices are the key reason that the US spends so much on healthcare, says Christopher Whaley of Brown University. The situation is particularly bad in Indiana and Vermont. In arguing for help, employers in Indiana cited a study showing they pay among the highest prices in the country for hospital services through the insurance plans they sponsor. In Vermont, the biggest insurer was at risk of going broke last year. Part of the problem is a lack of competition in a state with few hospitals and one dominant insurer. There isn't really that market dynamic that could keep prices in check, says Owen Foster, chair of Vermont's healthcare regulator. Vermont is not alone. Across America, hospital competition is disappearing. In nearly half of metropolitan areas in 2023, either one or two health systems controlled the entire inpatient care market. Studies have linked consolidation to rising prices and observed scant improvement in quality. I think economists are naturally very hesitant to say that regulators should intervene in pricing mechanisms, says Mr. Whaley. But he says that hospitals have become so consolidated that price caps might make sense. In other ways, too, hospital care is far from a perfect marketplace. Patients rarely shop around, prices are not always obvious. Even when they are, insurance shields patients from the worst of the costs. Those costs may filter through into higher premiums, but the process is opaque and employers' subsidies soften the blow. Indiana's solution is the more targeted of the two. Its price caps will apply only to non-profit hospitals. They must bring their prices below a statewide average by 2029 or risk losing their tax-exempt status. Mr. Whaley reckons this could save up to $1 billion a year. Mike Braun, the Republican governor, had hoped to go further, but anybody impacted by it fought a more aggressive approach, he says. It's about the best we could get done. I would call that sad. For many on the right, even this level of government intervention is anathema, but the arguments for price caps have a populist tinge that resonates with the MAGA wing of the Republican Party. Mr. Braun, for his part, compares hospitals to a water or energy provider. Even if you're conservative, you're going to be interested in regulating a utility, he says, because it's the only way you keep them in bounds. Vermont has taken a different approach. The state regulator will cap what hospitals can charge for every procedure at a multiple of the rate paid by Medicare, the federal health program for the elderly. Depending on where the cap is set, savings could range from $9.6 million a year if prices are limited to 4 times the Medicare rate to $445 million at twice the rate. Hospitals are not happy. Calculating average prices is not straightforward, says Scott Tittle, the president of the Indiana Hospital Association. The danger is you start comparing apples to oranges to screwdrivers. He argues that hospitals are already cutting costs and operating on slim margins. Economists warn that caps could threaten innovation or that the price of procedures might rise to meet the cap. If maximums are set too low, there may be some closures that will be very hard felt by Hoosiers, warns Mr. Tittle. In Vermont, though, there is a sense that big changes lie ahead. We really need to transition care out of hospitals, and what that means is the hospitals will not be able to stay as they are, says Mr. Foster. Other parts of the country are watching with interest. Bills that would limit charges have recently been filed in states as politically diverse as Maine, Massachusetts, and Oklahoma. Hospital wards have a way of bringing unusual groups together.
United States.
Lexington. The Blame Israel lobby. If the Iran war goes wrong, MAGA will want a culprit who is not named Donald Trump.
If you take Saddam's regime, I guarantee you that it will have enormous positive reverberations on the region. Benjamin Netanyahu testified to Congress in 2002 as President George W. Bush was mulling an invasion of Iraq. After the war curdled from military triumph to strategic disaster, Mr. Netanyahu's advocacy for toppling Saddam Hussein helped darken suspicions, first in the academic world and then in American politics, that Israel had nefarious influence over American foreign policy. But Mr. Netanyahu was not in power then, having been outmanoeuvred by the only Israeli politician this century cunning and tough enough to sideline him, Ariel Sharon. And as Prime Minister, Sharon privately cautioned Mr. Bush about an invasion. Daniel Kurtzer, then America's ambassador in Tel Aviv, recalls dispatching a cable to Colin Powell, then the Secretary of State, before the war, summarizing the views he was consistently hearing from senior Israeli officials and analysts, that Israel was fine with the idea but was not pushing it, that if America invaded, it should depart as quickly as possible, and that it should not imagine it could transform Iraq into a democracy. Pretty good advice, in retrospect. The war on Iran presents a more complicated picture. Mr. Netanyahu, now Israel's longest-serving Prime Minister, has for years opposed negotiations with Iran and pressed for military action. And whereas, in the two previous Gulf wars, American leaders worked to recruit other allies while keeping Israel out, fearing its participation would alienate the Arab world, this time the two armed forces are fighting together and all but alone. After Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, said Israel in effect set the timing of the initial strike, Donald Trump protested too much, insisting, if anything, I might have forced Israel's hand. Unlike in the years after the invasion of Iraq, the suspicion that Israel dragged America into war is not seeping into American debate. It is rushing in to fill the vacuum left by Mr. Trump's failure to rally Americans behind any core national interests. It immediately became the stuff of popular culture. Detractors on CNN are saying that Trump had no authorization for this war, but he actually did, joked a fake newscaster on the sketch program Saturday Night Live the day after the war began. Netanyahu said it was okay. Democratic senators have accused Mr. Trump of choosing to follow Israel, and some of the loudest voices in Mr. Trump's MAGA movement are saying the same thing. Tucker Carlson, a right-wing commentator, has branded this Israel's war. Mr. Carlson is half right. This is also not only Israel's war. Mr. Netanyahu may again prove to have offered lousy advice, but Mr. Trump, like his predecessors, was free to reject it. In fact, for those who suspect undue influence, the true culprit might be Senator Lindsey Graham, a hawk who coached Mr. Netanyahu in how to lobby the president, according to the Wall Street Journal. Mr. Trump has shown he will push Israel around, as when he ordered it to recall its bombers at the end of the 12-day war with Iran in June. And he has shown he will ignore Israel's interests in pursuit of what he sees as America's own, as when he cut a deal with the Houthis in Yemen in May to stop them molesting ships in the Red Sea without demanding they stop attacking Israel. If Mr. Trump decides the economic fallout of the war is damaging his political interest, which he equates with the national interest, he will end it regardless of Mr. Netanyahu's goal of regime change. But just why Mr. Trump chose to join in this war is a mystery. It is probably going to become even more confusing to his America First supporters over time. He has placed tremendous pressure on European allies to deal with threats on their continent from Russia, which, unlike Iran, does have nuclear weapons. Just 4 months ago, his national security strategy summarized his agenda for the Middle East as shift burdens, build peace. Why didn't he accept Mr. Netanyahu's reported offer for Israel to strike Iran's ballistic missiles on its own? Those missiles were a threat to Israel and other states in the region, not to America. Mr. Kurtzer suspects Mr. Trump wanted a repeat of the quick victory he got in joining Israel's strikes on Iran's nuclear facilities in June. I think he just wanted to be part of the victory parade, he says. Maybe the war will end soon and clearly benefit America. Israel will have shown its value as an ally, and Iran's attacks on Gulf states may draw them closer to the Jewish state. But if the conflict damages America, it will be Mr. Netanyahu who has made the gravest strategic mistake in allying with an intensely polarizing American president, impulsive enough to wage war without broad support for the cause at home or overseas. Previous prime ministers viewed bipartisan support in America as the most existential issue for Israel in the world, more than Iran's nuclear program, says Nadav Ayal, an eminent Israeli journalist. When Mr. Ayal was a young diplomatic reporter, Sharon summoned him to his cabin while flying home from a meeting at the White House in 2002 and confided off the record that he feared Iraq was the wrong war, but he never voiced that concern publicly. By contrast, Mr. Netanyahu began making Israel a partisan cause in America when he lobbied Congress in 2015 to oppose President Barack Obama's nuclear deal with Iran. Mr. Netanyahu's brutal prosecution of the war in Gaza further alienated Democrats while also exposing the risk of his bet on an America First Republican Party. Before the Iran war began, most Republicans under 45 already supported curtailing military aid to Israel, according to a poll in December by the Institute for Middle East Understanding. Mr. Trump's MAGA base will probably never turn against him. But that just means if this war goes wrong, they will need someone else to blame.
The Americas.
Security in Haiti. Violent hope. Tougher policing and American support are weakening gangsters' control.
The kidnapping was to take place in the busy middle-class neighbourhood of Delmas in Port-au-Prince, Haiti's capital. The commercial hub is one of the few districts still mostly under government control, but Haiti's gangsters have grown accustomed to operating where they please. Not this time. On February 23rd, the Haitian National Police, or PNH, foiled the gangsters, killing 6 of them and seizing 8 weapons, including 4 assault rifles. 2 officers died in the operation and 2 others were wounded by gunshots. Haiti's long-running battle with gangs has been escalating ever since the assassination of President Jovenel Moïse in 2021. The trial of his alleged murderers started on March 10th in Miami. A confederacy of 26 gangs took control of much of the capital and still holds it today. It calls itself Vivre Ensemble, Haitian Creole for living together. Since then, thousands of Haitians have been killed and almost 1.5 million displaced by gang violence. But at last there are signs, like the foiled kidnap plot, that the gang's grip is weakening. A new police chief, Vladimir Paresson, who took up his post in August, has ferociously pursued Vivre Ensemble, working with international partners like the United States and private security firms. The streets of Port-au-Prince show small signs of progress as Haitians try to piece their lives back together. A sense of political unity is emerging. Though Haiti still lacks a president, the Prime Minister, Alix Fils-Aimé, became the country's sole leader after the dissolution of the fractious council that had been in charge. It had failed in its mission to restore security and hold elections, now many years overdue. Mr. Fils-Aimé enjoys the backing of the United States, which gives him an advantage. That he has such support is evidence of the difference made by the American chargé d'affaires since he arrived in June. Henry Wooster, a seasoned diplomat, ended months of uncertainty over the American administration's stance on the country. Donald Trump once called it a shithole. The chargé d'affaires has revitalized international efforts to confront the gangs. The United States brokered a security plan for Haiti at the United Nations in September. It replaced the meek international police mission set up during the Joe Biden administration and led by Kenya that was understaffed and under-equipped. The new Gang Suppression Force, or GSF, is bigger, better funded, and has more leeway to use force. The first 1,500 troops from Chad arrive in April, with a total of 5,500 to be deployed in the coming months. The improvements are encouraging. The streets in Upper Delmas are clean, with rubbish now being collected. Business is beginning to buzz. The airport, forced by the violence to close in November 2024, has reopened for domestic flights, though international passengers must still fly into the capital by helicopter from the northern city of Cap-Haïtien. Gangsters still control many roads, demanding bribes at gunpoint for passage. For all the improvements, only a sliver of the capital remains safe. It runs from the middle-class suburb of Pétionville and the gated mansions of the elite in the hills above the city to the downtown area, home to some government ministries. Much of the rest of the capital, where 2.9 million people live, is still controlled by gangs. In suburbs like Carrefour, relative peace reigns, though few dare go out at night for fear of running into gang patrols. For the bulk of the population that live in gang-controlled areas, absolutely nothing has changed, says Diana Menilla Arroyo, head of Médecins Sans Frontières in Haiti. Few foreigners reside in Haiti. Many embassies and UN offices are closed. The United States once had 400 diplomats in the country, including staff at the now-defunct Agency for International Development. Now it has just 20. Haiti's economy is ragged. Commerce continues, but the gangs charge tolls to people entering and leaving neighbourhoods and demand fees from people moving goods, including food. Vicky Onelian, a 28-year-old designer, had to leave her neighbourhood last year after gangs set up roadblocks that made it too dangerous to get to work. She worries about her family and questions police strategy. Gangs are entrenched in her neighbourhood while the police still have no presence. State finances are dire. Government revenue has fallen to barely 5% of GDP, the lowest in recorded history, according to Gabriel Verret, a Haitian economist who has advised several presidents and finance ministers. The average across the Caribbean is 20% of GDP. The Haitian state is standing, says Mr. Verret, but barely. Last year gangs burned his home and others near the finance ministry to the ground. The government spends 3/5 of its scant resources on salaries. Little is left for other running costs or for capital spending. Much now rests on the shoulders of the Prime Minister. Mr. Fils Aimé is a 54-year-old businessman who hails from Haiti's elite and is friendly with several people subject to American sanctions for corruption and ties to the gangs. His two main jobs are linked. The first is to consolidate security gains and continue to push back the gangs. The second is to steer a more secure Haiti through its first elections in almost a decade. In February, the country's electoral body started to register political parties wanting to field candidates. It has begun to prepare for the first round of voting, scheduled for August. To succeed, the Prime Minister must rely on the 55-year-old Mr. Paraison, who has worked for the National Police since it was set up in 1995. Haiti previously had no civilian police at all. He plans to recruit 4,000 officers a year in order to raise a police-to-resident ratio that has always been far below international standards. We are equipping ourselves with everything necessary so that our officers are truly armed and well prepared to face this challenge, Mr. Paraison says. Foreign assistance, which used not to include support for the police, is now essential for Mr. Paraison. The U.S. State Department funds a helicopter medical evacuation service and a small trauma unit for the PNH officers, run by Hero Foundation, an American NGO that is building a 30-bed hospital in Pétionville where wounded policemen will be treated. This kind of provision boosts morale. Mr. Paraison has this warrior mentality, said Stacey Librandi, who runs Hero Foundation. The rank and file love him. The mood at the PNH is also boosted by working in a task force with the new American-backed GSF. In addition, the PNH is being bolstered by a team of highly trained military contractors, mostly former American and Salvadoran soldiers. The contractors help the police carry out kamikaze drone attacks, cheap drones with explosives strapped to them flown into gangster territory and detonated. They have proved effective in pushing back the gangs. The drones are giving the police a chance to fight, says Ms. Librandi. The police previously carried out operations against the gangs on their own. Now they have serious backup. While the United States provides the bulk of security funding, more than $1 billion over the last 3 years, Canada has also helped. It has given $350 million since 2022, more than half of it for training and equipping the police with armoured vehicles. The Organization of American States, an intergovernment body, has also paid for equipment, including 90 Kawasaki police bikes, bulletproof vests, ammunition, and even boots and socks. Many Haitians sympathize with their overstretched police force, but they also worry about the fallout from the increasingly vicious fight against the gangs. Drone attacks have driven gang leaders into hiding, but have also terrified civilians still trapped in their neighborhoods. In a report published on March 10th, Human Rights Watch, an international monitor, questioned the legality of using explosive drones in densely populated urban areas. It said at least 1,243 people had been killed by them in 141 operations in 2025, including 17 children and at least 43 adults who were reportedly not members of criminal groups. Mr. Paraison brushes off such concerns. Everything in life takes sacrifice. If you don't feel comfortable where you are, get out, he says. Pressed on whether poor Haitian families have this option, he doubles down. Tell me who you hang out with, and I'll tell you who you are. Unfortunately, we're in a fratricidal situation. If you don't want safety, I can't offer it to you. This aggressive stance has helped rattle the gangs, but it may fall short of making Haiti safe enough to hold elections by August. During that process, Haitians must trust the police to keep law and order. The United States, Canada and others hope Mr. Fils-Aimé can use his acumen and his network, despite its drawbacks, to steer Haiti through. He cannot run himself, but has powerful friends who may, including Olivier Barrault, a banker and insurance titan. Weakening the gangs is a boon, but if Mr. Fils-Aimé cannot re-establish democracy after 10 years of lawlessness, Haitians may find their country slipping into chaos once again.
The Americas.
The Oscars. The new national pride. Brazilian cinema is having a moment in the spotlight.
When the Academy Awards take place on March 15th, few countries will be watching as closely as will Brazil. Last year, for the first time, a Brazilian film was nominated for Best Picture. I'm Still Here, set during the military dictatorship. Brazilians dressed in imitation of the Golden Trophy at Carnival and hosted parties in homage to the film's lead actress. There are three terms everyone in the world knows: Coca-Cola, Jesus Christ, and the Oscars, says Fabiana Gulani, a producer in Sao Paulo. When the film took home an Oscar, it was like winning a prize for the whole country. This year promises more. The Secret Agent, a drama by Kleber Mendoza Filho, is nominated for 4 Academy Awards, including Best Picture and Best Actor. Brazilians are dressing up again. At a recent festival, Rodrigo Teixeira, another producer, mused that cinema had overtaken the nation's flagging football team as the biggest source of pride for our country. Brazil's sudden success has led to euphoria in a nation that has long been considered Latin America's cinema laggard. Mexico, a land of film fanatics, has won over 24 Academy Awards. It boasts over 7,000 cinema screens, twice as many as Brazil. Brazilians agonize that Argentina, its main football rival, already has 2 Oscars to its name. Even slender Chile has won 3. When a Brazilian agent tried to drum up interest in the films of Glauber Rocha, a celebrated local filmmaker in Europe in the 1960s, he lamented, "Glauber, truly nobody is interested in our films." The rise of Brazilian cinema is not just a victory for the film sector, but a successful business case, says Ana Paula Souza, a journalist who covers cinema. For decades, Brazil's entertainment landscape was dominated by Rede Globo, a prolific producer of soppy telenovelas, to which Brazilians were glued every evening. Much like old Hollywood, Globo produced everything in-house. It had the country's best actors, screenwriters and directors on contract and prevented them from working for other companies. The rest of the industry was left with the cinematic scraps of advertising and music videos. Cinema was the preserve of an intellectual elite, while paid television was non-existent. In 1992, amid a deep recession, only 3 locally made films got a national release. State support and laws to foster competition turned things around. In 2002, the government set up Ancine, the cinema regulator. It collects data on Brazilian films and determines the number of days that films are exhibited. It also controls a fund for local filmmakers. Then, in 2011, the country passed the Paid TV Law. Restrictions on foreign ownership of cable TV channels were lifted. Telecoms firms were allowed to compete. It also mandated that paid channels broadcast at least 3.5 hours of Brazilian content every week during prime time, half of which had to be produced independently. The law shook up Brazil's film sector by cutting into Globo's monopoly, says Eli Carter, an associate professor of Brazilian film and television at the University of Virginia. Though Globo remains dominant, independent production houses mushroomed to fill the mandatory weekly slots. The penetration of paid television rose from around 15% in the 2000s to almost half by the mid-2010s. By the time paid television lost market share to streaming services and the Internet, Brazil had dozens of independent production houses up and running. Ancini's fund for independent filmmakers was awash with money. The government of then-President Jair Bolsonaro, a hard-right populist, cut funding for the arts, including Ancini. Mr. Bolsonaro considered much artistic output to be a waste of money. Cinema audiences also shrank during the pandemic and have not recovered. Over half of Brazilian films shown in cinemas in 2025 sold fewer than 1,000 tickets. Industry focus has therefore shifted to streaming platforms such as Netflix and HBO Max. Today we have several big producers, big directors, big distributors. We have reached a mature moment, says Caio Galane, Fabiano's brother and partner. Now we need a second cycle, which means exporting our work abroad and increasing the market share of Brazilian productions in the country. To achieve this, the Senate is discussing a streaming law that would force platforms to produce more local shows, display them on their homepages, and pay Ancini's tax, benefiting local filmmakers. It is expected to pass in the coming months and would extend what the paid television law did to the streaming sector, says Mr. Carter. It could double state support for the industry. Brazilians have one final reason to hope that their good fortune will last, an internationalist turn by the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences. The 10,000 members of the Beverly Hills-based organisation determine the Oscar winners. Since 2016, when actors criticised the Academy for over-representing white men, it has expanded its membership across continents. Today, more than a fifth of members are not from the United States. This may have helped international productions, like the South Korean drama Parasite, to win big in recent years. The language barrier no longer exists in Hollywood. It ended with Parasite, says Mr. Teixeira. Brazilians expect little joy from this year's Football World Cup. The Academy Awards just might deliver.
Asia.
Taiwan's drone industry. The parts China cannot reach. The bid to make China-free drones takes off in Taiwan.
Before Russia's all-out invasion of Ukraine in 2022, David Liu never imagined making military drones. But when Taiwan, where he lives, launched a program to build its own drone industry that year, he jumped at the chance. His firm, Kunwei Technology, now exports 2 models to Ukraine via Poland, both kamikaze quadcopters. The bigger of them can carry bombs of up to 8 kilograms and fly at 140 kilometers per hour. They are twice the price of equivalents from China, the world's biggest drone maker, but they have one key selling point: no Chinese components. Taiwan is not known as an arms exporter. Since China's defeated nationalists fled there in 1949, it has been among the world's bigger importers of weaponry, mostly from America. Taiwan now makes many of its own arms, but still relies heavily on American ones. Before 2025, Taiwan's defence exports consisted mainly of some old helicopters and small boats donated to African and Latin American countries. That is changing as Taiwan positions itself as a supplier of non-red unmanned aerial vehicles, or UAVs, i.e. without Chinese parts, to America, its allies and other countries worried about China's espionage and control over industrial supply chains. Taiwan's production of UAVs has increased from about 10,000 units in 2024 to more than 12 times that in 2025. Its exports rose more than 35-fold to about 123,000 units last year, almost all its output. The Czech Republic was its biggest buyer, followed by Poland. Industry insiders say their purchases mostly went to Ukraine, where many are used on the battlefield, giving valuable feedback on their performance. Another bumper year for exports is expected in 2026, after reaching 85,500 units in the first 2 months. Taiwan launched its drone program after observing Ukraine's use of the technology. The main aim was to equip Taiwan's own armed forces, which had just a few hundred drones. China had tens of thousands. Taiwan has since pledged to build an entirely non-red UAV industry by the end of 2026, with annual output of 180,000 units by 2028. Last year, it also promised to buy more than 200,000 drones for its own armed forces by 2033. America and its allies are also ramping up UAV production. But most still depend on parts from China, which accounts for 70 to 80% of global UAV production. That is increasingly seen as a security risk. Taiwan also uses some Chinese drone parts, including rare earth magnets, but is moving much faster to phase them out because of the threat it faces from China. And as a wealthy, high-tech powerhouse that specialises in precision manufacturing, it has the know-how and capital to quickly develop its own UAV components. Taiwanese officials say their plan is on track. Complete UAVs and modules representing a cyber risk, such as those for flight control, had to be free of Chinese parts by the start of 2026 to qualify for government procurement and subsidies, says the Economic Affairs Ministry. Passive components from China, including optical lenses and rare earth magnets, must be gone by January 1st, 2027. The programme is critical not just for Taiwan's own national security, but for gaining access to high-security markets, the ministry says. Some Taiwanese UAVs are already 100% non-red. Kunwei, which started producing agricultural drones in 2016, used to source about 40% of its components, including batteries, motors and propellers, from China. It now buys them all locally, or imports them from friendly countries such as Japan. Although that increases costs, Mr. Liu estimates that his drones are about half the price of those made entirely in Japan or South Korea. And as concerns about China grow, new markets are opening. Kunwei formed a partnership last year to make military and civilian drones in India. Several other Taiwanese firms are exporting UAVs or components to Europe or contemplating manufacturing there. One, Thunder Tiger, is in talks about building a factory in Poland. It also sells to Southeast Asia. But its general manager, Jean Su, says its priority is the bigger American market. It plans to start making drone motors in Ohio this year, and he says already supplies parts to 3 of 25 firms shortlisted for a Pentagon program to buy cheap one-way attack UAVs. Taiwanese officials hope that all this will help to satisfy American demands for the island to become more self-reliant. The Trump administration has been urging Taiwan to increase defence spending from 3% of GDP to 10%, and the Pentagon wants it to buy more small mobile weapons to prepare better for a Chinese attack. But Taiwan's bid to embed itself in Western drone supply chains is also part of a hedging strategy in case Mr. Trump does a deal with China that waters down America's security commitments to the island. Surprising gaps in Taiwan's capabilities persist. It is the world's leading maker of the most advanced semiconductors, but according to a government think tank, the Research Institute for Democracy, Society and Emerging Technology, does not produce flight control, positioning or communication chips, nor all the software needed specifically for drones. But the government has pledged $1.4 billion to help close such gaps. By 2029, it aims to produce half the rare earth magnets it needs. Another obstacle is Taiwan's political opposition, which has blocked a planned increase in defence spending. The longer-term challenge is ensuring stable demand. Some local manufacturers worry that if the opposition, which favours closer ties with China, wins the presidential election in 2028, the government will lose interest in modernising the armed forces. They also fear that global demand could taper after the war in Ukraine ends. Ukraine, which can make some 5 million UAVs annually, could flood the market, though it relies heavily on Chinese components. The hope in Taiwan is that the democratic world's worries about Chinese drone components will only grow. America already requires all its military drones to be free of Chinese parts, although compliance has been patchy. Since December, it has also banned imports of new foreign-made models and components, including those from DJI, China's biggest drone maker, while allowing the Departments of War and Homeland Security to apply for exemptions for those that do not pose a security risk. Some European countries are tightening restrictions too. Weaning the West off China's cheap drones will take time, but Taiwan has made a flying start.
Asia.
Nepal. Landslide in the Himalayas. A former rapper is Prime Minister.
It is an arduous trip from Kathmandu, which sits in an expansive valley in the lap of the Himalayas, to Jharpa, a district in the southeastern lowlands of Nepal. Even on a good day, the 430-kilometre distance takes well over 10 hours to cover by car. On a bad day, better to wonder if your journey is really necessary. Balendra Shah, popularly known as Balan, made the trip with ease. 2 months ago, he was mayor of Kathmandu, Nepal's capital. In national elections on March the 5th, he stormed to victory in the Jharpa 5 parliamentary constituency, defeating his opponent, the 74-year-old four-time former Prime Minister K.P. Sharma Oli, by a ratio of 7 votes to 2. By the time of going to press, his Rastriya Swatantra Party, or RSP, had won 183 of 275 seats in Nepal's lower house, just 1 seat short of a supermajority. Aged just 35, Balan will be Nepal's next Prime Minister. The outcome is a democratic confirmation of a Gen Z uprising that ousted Mr. Oli's government last year. Spurred initially by a social media ban and sustained by widespread anger over corruption, nepotism and unemployment, young Nepalis stormed the streets in September to demand better prospects. The police responded with live gunfire. In all, 77 people were killed during the protests, which spiralled out of control as Nepal's parliament, prime ministerial office and several businesses were set ablaze. Mr. Oli resigned and a caretaker government took power, promising to hold elections within 6 months. So it has. For much of the past 2 decades, Nepal has been run by 3 parties: Mr. Oli's Communists, the centre-left Nepali Congress, and a Maoist outfit. They alternated gleefully between propping each other up and toppling each other. Meanwhile, economic opportunities grew ever more tenuous, and youth unemployment hovered stubbornly at around 20%. The median age in Nepal is just 26, and millions of young Nepalis have emigrated in search of work. In the immediate aftermath of the revolution, youthful protest leaders took divergent paths. Some joined the interim government, others set up their own parties. A few flirted with the 3 old ones. Nepal seemed likely to follow Bangladesh, which experienced a similar youth-led revolution in 2024, but where protest leaders failed to convert their energy into lasting political power. In Nepal, that changed in January, when Balan joined the RSP, a 4-year-old party founded by a former television host on an anti-corruption platform. Balan promises to wipe out corruption and focus on governance. Squashed between two giants, India and China, Nepal is used to being a buffer state where the two vie for influence. Balan's vision is to make it a bridge. That, along with promises to create 1.2 million jobs and double GDP per person to $3,000 in 5 years, may not be realistic, but it was a breath of fresh air for voters. As mayor since 2022, Balan had a decent track record, having tackled Kathmandu's sanitation woes and evicted illegal businesses from central areas. Once Balan joined the RSP, youth leaders followed. So did voters of all ages, including lifelong supporters of the old parties. Kul Bahadur Hadka, a 68-year-old security guard in Japa 5, has one son in Dubai and another in Malaysia. The failure to create jobs is why there is no one to take care of us, he says. Mahendra Yadav, an 85-year-old in a nearby town, says he supports the RSP in the hope it could deliver a better future for his grandchild. Balan's enormous victory brings two big risks. The first is that he fails to meet the outsized expectations a desperate country has heaped on his shoulders. Cleaning up a corrupt system is harder than tidying Kathmandu's streets. The second is Balan's governing style. He can be aggressive. He does not speak to the press, preferring to use social media to communicate with the public. His eviction of hawkers from central Kathmandu was sometimes violent and offered them no rehabilitation. Yet for now, Nepalis can breathe air filled with a rare sense of optimism.